again. I am Jess from Knits Please and welcome to my YouTube channel. Thank you very much for joining me. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, thank you. I really appreciate you coming along and checking me out. And if you've seen one of my videos before, thank you also for coming back. I really appreciate your support. So if you like what you see in this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. If you want to find me elsewhere, you can find me on Instagram at knitspleaseuk. You can find my website at www.knitsplease.co.uk, and I'm also on Ravelry. I'm not the best at updating my Ravelry, but you know, I'm happy to connect on there. I'll try and kind of get a bit better in that, but I'm mostly active on Instagram, and I update my website regularly. So yeah, I wanted to do something a little bit different for this video today. I've done a knitting podcast. I've done one episode so far, so if you'd like to have a watch of that, that's also on my channel. And I'm hoping to do those once a month. I'm hoping that I'll be able to keep up knitting enough to have something to talk about once every month. But I also wanted to kind of change things up a little bit and include some different videos. I've got a couple of tutorials, and I'm going to keep kind of building on those and adding more tutorials. But today I thought I would just kind of have a bit of a chat to you guys about my knitting history and why I started knitting, and a little bit of the knitting journey that I've taken to get to where I am now, kind of trying to grow my own business with Knits Please. So let's get stuck in, shall we? I've got a cup of green tea, which is always good when you're having a little bit of a chat. It's a little bit weird that no one's talking back to me, so hopefully I don't get too rambly on this video, but hopefully you'll like what I'm doing. So I very first learned to knit when I was a wee lass. My nanny, I do not remember a time when my nanny didn't knit. She always had knitting needles in her hand. She was always knitting when watching the TV, and like it's kind of all I've kind of known her for. And so when I was about seven years old, I think 7 years old, which was 21 years ago, so I've got quite a few years under my belt, my nanny first taught me how to knit. I don't have a great memory, so I don't really remember the first teaching event itself, but what I do remember is what came out of it, and that was a blue rectangle. Of course, you know, we all start learning to knit with a rectangle, but as soon as it was done, I immediately fashioned it into something more than just a rectangle. So I just sewed up the side, you know, put the ends together, sewed it up, and suddenly it was a boob tube, and I had something to wear. I hope I didn't. I don't think I left the house wearing it. I'm sure it wasn't a good look, but you know, we've all got to start somewhere. So following that instance, I sort of knit on and off over the next kind of following years. I went through phases of having certain garments, certain items that I really liked. So I went through a phase of knitting berets. So all of my early knitting patterns that I followed came from my nanny, of course. So this is the original knitting pattern, which my nanny gave me, and this is the beret that I knit right here. So this was the first time I was following a knitting pattern. This was a super vintage one. I don't know if it's got the date on it. Let's have a look. I can't see a date on it, but it's definitely vintage. So it was the first time I was doing anything other than a rectangle. So it was my first time doing any kind of decreases to shape the crown of the hat. And I remember I was knitting it in my nanny's flat, and I kept going to her every time I saw something in the pattern that I didn't quite know what it meant. Wool forward, slip one, wool back. These things were things that I just had no idea what they were. So I was constantly kind of running up to my nanny every time I reached the next line, like, what does this mean? What does this mean? And I distinctly remember that first beret I knit was so tight. I was kind of like jamming my needles through the stitches, but I persevered and I knit the whole thing. And you know, I was so proud of that. That's like the first kind of like real wearable thing that I knit. naturally, that prompted me to knit about 100 more berets, and I don't own a single one of them anymore, so I can't show you. But that was kind of like the first foray into a bit more technical knitting. I think I was in my mid-teens then, and that's when I got back into it. And then I sort of stopped knitting again for a few years, and then I came back to it when I took a career break from work. So I'd been working in retail for a few years, and I hadn't been to university, I hadn't done the gap year situation, so I felt like I'd got as far as I could go in the roles that I was doing, and I wanted to take some time out and explore my creative interests. So of course, exploring creative interests meant knitting. I look back on that time and I just have to laugh to myself about what I was making. So at the time it was super fashionable. I worked in Topshop, so these were all over Topshop. It was super fashionable to wear just a collar. So it was kind of like a jewelry adornment piece. Some of them were really kind of like fancy, some of them were really casual. So it was just a collar that you would kind of like button or tie, and it would, you know, enhance and accessorize your outfit. So I was a genius, you know. I thought, I'll knit some collars. What could people want more? And although I had knit the beret, I hadn't gained enough confidence to feel that I could knit anything other than a rectangle of my own design. So I knit a ton of rectangles in whatever yarn my poor nanny was able to kind of like gather for me from her stash. And to make them collar shaped, I would just knit the rectangle and then just fold up the corners and sew them and put a little button or something here. And they were awful, like really awful. Imagine this kind of like coarse lilac yarn, ribbing in just like a big long rectangle, kind of messy. I hadn't got the tension right. You just fold over the corners, so you've got this weird kind of like triangular edge and a random button pop there. So naturally it didn't turn out to be the incredible business venture that I had envisaged. As I'm sure you're not surprised to hear. But what it did do was really kind of like reaffirm to me that I do love knitting, and it's something that I kind of want to do more of. So after scrapping the knitted accessory business, I instead focused on just like knitting things for myself. So again, as my style has evolved over the past couple of years, the things that I knit during that time I no longer have. So I think I'm going to try and pop in a couple of pictures here, if I can find any of my old knits, just to show you about sort of like 4 years ago, the kind of things that I was knitting. So hopefully you'll be looking at those things right now. Isn't that exciting? Oh, video editing skills, how wonderful when you learn them. So then I started to kind of come into my own with my knitting, and actually I have that garment here, which was the garment that was sort of the tipping point when I really understood, you know, what my style was. And it's not just my style of knitting, it's my style in like day-to-day life. I am really very much inspired by minimalism. I no longer have really any items of sort of colourful items, coloured items in my wardrobe. It's now just sort of mostly black and grey and a little bit of white. I'm not sure if I've even got any patterns. So just really simple, minimal styling, and then kind of paring down my wardrobe to just that kind of aesthetic, I suddenly felt so much freer. Everything I wanted to wear would go with each other. I never had those mornings where I spent like 10 hours just looking at my wardrobe, no idea what to wear, clothes strewn all over the bed and the floor. So this was the item that brought that and my knitting together. So this is, you might actually recognise it, because this is now one of my knitting patterns. It was the first garment knitting pattern, so a lot of firsts. It was the first garment knitting pattern that I released earlier this year, and this is just my roll neck vest. So grey yarn, minimalist style, just a stocking stitch with some ribbing, and that was really what triggered my brand. and Knits Please as you may know it or hopefully get to know it. So that is where the evolution took place. That was the year before last year. And that's when, yeah, I really kind of like got a good feel for like what my knits were, what I wanted to do with them, how I wanted to create, and what I wanted to make for myself. So I just want to talk a little bit now about the story of Knits Please itself, because there's one thing knitting, there's another thing trying to make a business out of it. And the idea for Knits Please came about at a very specific time. So I'd been visiting some family in Leeds, actually where I now live. I've recently moved up here. So it was the summer of 2016. And we went to the Leeds Wool Festival, and I was very excited. I'd not really done any specific wool festivals before. I'd just done like general craft things like that. So I hadn't, for me it was like my first foray into like the knitting community. And I was really excited. So we went along, sort of paid the entry fee and started having a look around, and you know, the more stores that we went by, the more I felt like it just wasn't for me. You know, there wasn't anything there that I felt really reflected me as a knitter, my personal style. You know, there wasn't anything there that I would automatically gravitate towards. And having kind of established a little bit more of like what I love, both knitting and in terms of like the way I want to dress and the way I want to kind of style my home and live my life, I was really, really disappointed. And because there was nothing there for me, I thought, well, there must be other people like me out there. I can't be the only one who likes a kind of less traditional knitting style. And so I saw a need, and I thought I'd try and do something to fill that gap myself. So really, when Knits Please started, I was knitting the things that I would want to knit. You know, it was the things that, the patterns that I would want to make, and you know, the styles that I would want to see and I would want to wear. And that's really informed everything that I've done since then. And today I'm working on my, well, second, third and fourth garment pattern designs. I've had exceptionally positive responses. I feel so grateful for everyone who has purchased my patterns so far. And like, I'm just so excited to continue on my designer, maker, Knits Please business journey. So now I've got a couple of extra things that I wanted to share with you, which are just kind of like nice little stories that have kind of intertwined themselves into my knitting journey. So the first centers around this knitting pattern. Again, that jumper might look a bit familiar to you, but perhaps in a slightly less snazzy 1980s kind of way. So this pattern, again, is one of my nannies, and she knit this jumper for me when I was in my early teens. I was so excited that she was going to knit something for me. My nanny always used to knit things for a shop in Edinburgh. So she would knit items, send them up to this shop, who would then sell them on her behalf and kind of send her a check with the funds for any of her items that sold. So I was always knowing my nanny to knit for other people. So when she offered to knit for me, that was the most exciting thing I could possibly imagine. So she knit this jumper as is, same yarn, same colour, exactly the same style. And you know what, I loved it. I remember wearing it to school. Like, I wore school uniform, so we had like own clothes day every once in a while, so I must have been 16 or younger. And I wore this to school with like a high-waisted pleated skirt I'd got from a vintage fair, and my kind of string of vintage beads, all in shades of brown. And I felt so cool, you know. Looking back, probably not so much, but I was expressing my personal style at that time, and this jumper was a big part of it. And I held on to this jumper for a really long time. When my nanny passed away a few years ago, it was one of the things that kind of helped me to feel closer to her. And I found it really difficult because it was beige. And so as much as I loved it, I didn't really want to wear it. It didn't feel like me to wear it. So I decided to knit it again for myself. So you might have seen, if you follow me on Instagram, you might have seen my now grey version of this jumper. And it was just a wonderful experience to just kind of know that the stitches I was knitting were the stitches that my nanny had knit when she'd made it for me. And it just kind of felt a little bit like history repeating itself. Not only for the knitting of the pattern, but also because my nanny was the one that taught me how to knit, and the fact that I was mimicking the movements that she'd mimicked all those years ago and doing it again just last year, it just felt really special. So that was just like a really nice experience for me, and one of the most magical things I think about knitting is how personal it can be. And I have one other thing that I want to show you, which is a really proud achievement for me. So this was published earlier this year, and this is a magazine in which they asked me to write a feature. So Knits Please is featured in this wonderful sewing box magazine, which is, I mean, how cool is that? Like, what more can you want when you're trying to grow a brand than be featured in one of the coolest magazines? What's really fun to me is it's actually in Spanish. So I just have to trust that what I wrote is, you know, what they've included in the article. I can't see why it wouldn't be. There's a little project in here too. But I was just like, it was just so exciting to be approached by a publisher to have your work and your business, your brand featured in print. Really exciting. So I'm gonna obviously hold on to this forever as, you know, one of the really big achievements in the early days of Knits Please. So I think that's about it really. I feel like I've kind of rambled on a little bit. So I apologise if this is a bit of a lengthy video. If you stuck with me this long, thank you. I really appreciate it. And, you know, like, tell me a little bit about your knitting journey. So drop me a comment below. Let me know who taught you how to knit, some of your biggest achievements, your favourite knitting projects. Like, I'd love to hear all about your knitting journey too. So I'm gonna leave it there because I feel like I've grown sick of the sound of my own voice. But if you want to get to know me a bit more, if you want to connect with me, please do come and link up with me on Instagram at KnitsPleaseUK, and you can find my website where all of my knitting patterns are, and I've got a blog that goes up hopefully a bit more regularly from now on, and that is knitsplease.co.uk. So for now, that is all. I'll be back hopefully in a couple, 2 or 3 weeks with my second knitting podcast. Until then, I shall hopefully see you over on Instagram. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and do subscribe to my channel if you're interested in any other things about knitting. And I'll see you next time. Bye!